to give advice to students who are near the beginning of their careers about how to be a curious architect. At the same time, I wanted to speak to all of the senior professors and researchers and see if I could give the same advice, but at a different level that would mean the same thing to them. So this is my thought experiment. So for students and for researchers, advice number 1, build a tribe. Okay? If you are a musician, you're not going to make enough money living off of it unless you have an audience that follows your work. You don't have to play live, but you have to have an audience. If you're a designer, you will need a body of people that support what you're interested in, support what you do. They're going to pay for your curiosity and your design intelligence. So my first suggestion is build a tribe. You guys use WhatsApp or WeChat? WhatsApp. All right. Who's got more than 1,000 connections on WhatsApp? Viber. All right, who's got more than 1,000 connections on Viber? I just added Viber. I went to Tunisia and they're like, we don't use those, we use Viber. So. Who's got more than 1,000 connections? All right, you guys have some homework. Okay. You're going to be a 21st century architect, you need 1,000 people on your social media, minimum. I met a journalist from the Gaza Strip who had 500,000 followers on Twitter. 500,000 journalists. So he had a big tribe. Okay. Start with 1,000. So, yeah. That is your homework for the summer break, even if you're graduating. Okay? So my advice for researchers, this is different too. Building an audience, I call it building a tribe. Whatever you are researching, I'm talking to all my fellow professors, whatever you're researching, whatever you're interested in, there are other people interested in it. They may not know about you or they may not know what you're doing. It is your obligation to get that information out there, however you do it. They recommend that you do publications and then put it on social media so people can find the publications. This is how you build your tribe as a researcher. Whatever you are into, no matter how strange you think it is, there's already people that love that. You have to find them. It's a race. They're out there, they're waiting for your stuff. So it's called building a tribe. And my advice number 1. So students and researchers, build a tribe. Number 2, anybody good at multitasking? Anyone who's good at multitasking is a liar. All of the research that has been done by cognitive scientists, I don't have it here to show you, have proved that when you do multitasking, your brain capacity is reduced, your battery gets drained, and none of the things you do well. But often the research shows you think you're doing fantastic. Yes? Does this sound like karaoke? You think you're a great singer and everyone else is plugging their ears? Same with multitasking. Okay? Science says it's probably not as successful as you think it is. So, what's a really old school thing to recommend? For students and researchers, advice number 2, do one thing well. Okay? So, advice number 1, build a tribe. Number 2, do one thing well. When I was about to go to Harvard, someone pulled me aside and said, let me give you some advice. They said, you think you're smart, you think you're talented, you think you're going to be the best student there. You probably won't be. They said, but you can be the best student at something there. So one of the professors told me, says, figure out what you're going to be the best at. He said, you could be the best at telling stories. I was actually the funniest one, I think, in my year, maybe, hopefully. I knew someone who was really good at poker. I knew someone who was a really good liar. Each of these were the best at something. I knew someone who was really good at cooking Indian food. Right? Everybody found something they were really good at, and that's why we still remember them and we still work with them. Okay? So as a student, be good at one thing. Figure out what that is. It could be some part of architecture. It could be the political side. It could be the financial side. It could be the ecological side. It could be the social side. Maybe it's moving into a fringe area. My cousin didn't like architecture school, so he worked in a company designing windows. And I was the vice president of a window company. Probably makes more than I do. But do one thing well. When you're a researcher, Don't do what I do and promise 10 people you're going to do the same thing all in the same week. Do one thing well. We told people, beginning PhD students, we said if you could only write one book, what would you write? That's the book you should write for your PhD. If you're writing a novel, if you're starting a movie, if you could only make one movie, what movie would you make? Make that movie. Okay? If you're going to play an instrument, pick one instrument and learn one good song on that. Do one thing well is an important focus point in a world where everyone thinks they can multitask. So for researchers, this means pick your object of curiosity. What is it you are most curious about and pursue that. Don't try to do a whole bunch of little things to see which one might work. Pursue a curiosity. Okay? So advice number 1, build a tribe. Advice number 2, just do one thing well. And my last piece of advice, and this causes a lot of friction at home, I have been blessed by God with a great many mouths to feed. And boy, do they eat a lot. So all of my money has gone to feed my hungry little children. But also to feed their curiosity, because our house has 12,000 books in it. Yeah, my kids collect books worse than I do. And I won't even tell you how many transformers are guarding those books, but there's a lot. Okay? And the one thing I always tell my children, and tell my students, and tell my boss, whenever they say, oh, I'll do it later. No, that's not important, I'll get to it later. So my third piece of advice is going to really anger you. There is no later. Whenever you say you're going to do something later, you already said you're not going to do it. Whenever you say you're going to save it for another time, it's already gone. Yes? So if you recognize this and you say there is no later, that will sound like a Yoda. There, you do it or you don't. Does this make sense?
Yes.
Yes. So those of you that are multitasking and say, oh, I'll get to that one later, no, you won't. You know you won't. Your professor knows you won't. Your parents know you won't. Your friends know you won't. Okay? You're better off saying, that's not a priority. Because that's what professionals do. And then you can charge people for that. But if you say, I'll do it later, and you don't do it, then you can't charge people. So, this also has to do with, and I've been telling a lot of people, as bleak as you might think the system of austerity is in the world, if there's a crisis, you can always find some more money. No matter what happens, you can always find more money. We had an assignment in business school. They said, go out and get one of your friends to give you $100. This was a weekend assignment. So those of you that want to be architects, if you're graduating, anyone here graduating this year? No? They're all working upstairs on the thesis project, right? They actually told us this as an assignment. They said, go out and get someone to give you $100. And if you did, they said, you'd probably be good at business because that's all you're going to be doing as an architect. It's a joke, but you get the point, right? Go out and get your money. But you can always get more money. The one thing you can never get more of is time. Okay? When you're at the end of your life, that's it. I'll give you an example. We took a course called the Balanced Researcher, which is actually quite good. And it told us that if you think of, you know how many hours are in a week? Anyone know? An infinite number, right? No. It was like 170, 160 something. They said if you imagine each of those as a candy in a tube, and that's how many hours you have in a week, when you say you're going to do something, and it's going to take time, you have to take something out of the tube to fit that in. This is what architects are terrible at. Remember when I said there is no later? You have a fixed amount of time. There is no later because actually you're already overcommitted. You can't, I guarantee you, everybody in this room cannot do all the things that they plan to do this week. Yes? Yeah. Is that the same as last week? Will that be the same next week? Unless you listen to a visiting professor and start saying, that's not a priority for me. That's not going to get done. Here's a rude Americanism. Someone says, oh, can you do this for Tuesday? And you say, no, Tuesday doesn't work. How about never? Never works. Okay? That sounds very rude. I don't think you do that in the Philippines, but we do that in the States to each other all the time. We say, never works for me. How's never sound? Okay? There is no later. So as a researcher, this is also important too, because this means that if you are living in the future, and often as designers we have to plan for the future, design for the future, use data about the future, there is no later. If you're not going to do something right now, it probably won't get done. So that means you either have to give it to someone else, change what you're going to do, or get rid of something you're doing to accommodate it. Okay? So if you focus on one thing, that's my second piece of advice. If you have your tribe, my first piece of advice, and you recognize there is no later, you actually be very high performing. This is what I've learned in 30 years of architecture school. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas, Professor Thomas Mical.